This is A Conversation With, brought to you by the Conference Board's Human Capital Center. Welcome to A Conversation With, a dynamic discussion with the leader of the Conference Board's Human Capital Center, Dr. Rebecca Ray, and recognized experts in the human capital area. For this month's episode, Rebecca spoke with renowned HR experts, Dr. Jack Phillips, co-founder and chairman, and Dr. Patti Phillips, President and CEO of ROI Institute Inc. We present that conversation now.
Welcome. This is Rebecca Ray of the Conference Board, and I have the privilege of leading the Human Capital Center here at the Conference Board. And as a former practitioner, one of the real delights of my responsibilities here is to bring to you these conversations with some of the greatest thought leaders we have in the profession. And so today's installment of A Conversation With is no less exciting. It is with Drs. Jack and Patti Phillips of the ROI Institute, and I am absolutely thrilled to welcome both of them to the microphone today. So Jack, Patti, welcome, and thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Well, you know, I could spend the entire podcast talking about the accomplishments of the two of you. I know that together you founded the ROI Institute, where Jack, you now serve as the chairman, and Patti as the CEO. I know that there is no end to the number of lifetime achievements and awards that you have both garnered. You have so many seminal books on the topic of measurement and ROI. And, you know, I say this as a former chief talent officer. There were a few books on my desk that were so well thumbed and flagged for all the pages. Several of those were from the two of you. And so I bet you there's no end to the number of people in our profession who could tell a similar story. And I know that your influence goes well beyond this. You know, Patti, you were just named to the board of the United Nations Agency to be able to take through taking a look at the impact of national actions on public concerns. And I think, you know, it's a testament to the two of you, to the lives you've touched in this profession, as well as beyond that. And I'm deeply grateful for your time and very honored to have this conversation with you. Thank you both.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I've known the two of you for a while now, and certainly when I was a practitioner, I was the beneficiary of a lot of the work and the early seminal work that you folks have done. And I used the ROI framework mostly for projects and initiatives that were, you know, high profile or represented a significant investment. And, you know, I always found the advanced planning to be critically important, even as much as we wanted to kind of, you know, rush right to the meat of the thing. I'm wondering if do you see an expansion in the number of people, or let's say the number of projects that are now included in an ROI analysis? Is it changing at all? Is our profession developing any more muscle in this area?
I'll start with that, Patti, and you can add. I'd say it's expanding slowly. We add to that not only an important project that has high investment, but sometimes it's a high-profile project that might be not so credible or might have a lot of critics. A lot of soft skills programs. So the number is changing, and it's basically any program that the senior executives who provide funding for the HR talent management area, any project they really want to see the connection, we have to at least give it some serious consideration. But still, there's so many projects that don't really deserve this analysis, so we have to be cautious not to go so far, so much. So we still use a rule of 5 to 10% of your projects evaluated at the ROI level each year. That's a good, healthy benchmark. That's a good, healthy investment of resources. And that's a good, healthy approach to satisfy executives. So,
you know, if we're still looking at approximately the same number of, you know, as a percentage, has the level of comfort with being able to conduct these ROI studies changed in your perception? Tell me some of the ways in which work in this area, what are you seeing for shifts in the profession?
Yeah, so some shifts that I've seen, and then just back to your original question about muscle, I think we are seeing a little more muscle. But what I also think we are seeing is more interest in doing it. So that's part of the shift. People are coming. In the past, people wanted to demonstrate impact and ROI more as a reaction to a request. So someone's looking at the numbers and saying, show me the money. Today, while that's still a big driver in terms of interest, we are seeing more practitioners take the ball into their hands and running with it. They're saying, we need to know what we're doing for the business through these programs.
So less reactionary, more proactive?
I think so, Jack. That's what I'm
right.
seeing. Is that what you're seeing?
Yes, and that's good news. Not enough proactivity, but there. We work hard to make it easier to use with some technology sometimes, but it's a very logical process with like a drop-down menu. So you don't have to think of new ways to do things. They're all there for you. And we can keep the math quite low. We can actually have an ROI study that will have the support of the chief financial officer and not go beyond fourth grade mathematics. So you don't really have to do a lot of high-level analytics. We really have some data that's credible. So we have to keep reminding people, keep it simple. Don't get bogged down. Don't be paralyzed by the analysis. And paralysis by analysis can happen quickly.
Yeah, I think, having gone through the certification process and using it in my own world, there's a methodology, there's a rigor to it, and otherwise it wouldn't be defensible, right? So, you do have to kind of go through a process and complete the work. But I thought so much of it was just logical. It just seemed like, well, of course you would look at these things, and of course you would be very conservative in terms of articulating impact, for example, as opposed to saying that everything under the sun was the direct result of, my efforts as a chief talent officer. You know what I mean? So I think there might be some people who say, well, I didn't grow up with this, or I've not really tried it. I don't know how to start swimming in the pool. And, what would you say to them?
Well, it is logical. It's a logic model that's easy to follow. And you, as you say, it makes sense when you go through it. So we have to say, give it a try. It's almost a mental block of going down this path. The biggest barrier is the fear of the results. If it's negative, how am I going to deal with this? But if we design our project to deliver impact and ROI, and you can, then you're less likely to have a negative ROI. So I'd say start from the beginning. Start with why. Why are we doing this program? And let that why be very specific impact measures. When you do that and you design the whole system, making sure you have the right solution, you have objectives that drive the success all the way through impact, and you get all the stakeholders involved to drive toward that, you'll probably have a positive ROI. So designing for it up front. The worst thing we can do is evaluate a program that's been running for some time and there was no business alignment in the beginning. And there was nothing that really facilitated or enabled that business connection along the process. You can bet that's a negative ROI, and people don't want to see that. But we have to say, step back, design for it, follow a logical process. It doesn't take so many resources. You can do it with about $3,000 of time of someone in your organization normally to do one of these studies.
But the ability to articulate the business impact and the ability to secure, the support of senior leaders or executive sponsors, that's a small amount of money in the great scheme of things, I would think.
Right, compared to what organizations spend on talent.
Exactly.
It's a small amount of money.
Exactly.
We see maybe 3 to 5% of an entire budget dedicated to measurement evaluation. That's good. That's enough, because what you're not trying to do is become necessarily a research for research's sake organization. It's purposeful. And what we're seeing in terms of shift of mindset, my good friend Kevin Yates says like this: you've got to have a measurement mindset, right? So you've got to look at it in terms of what are we doing, why are we doing, how are we doing it, and a lot of times it gets lost on program owners. Sometimes, what's the real purpose of investing in talent? Yes, it's to have great employee experience and all these things. Well, really, it's to drive the business. That's it. And so if we can shift that mindset to more outcome focused, and as Jack said, begin with that so what up front, then it's much easier to demonstrate the ROI because you've thought about it up front and you've designed for that.
Absolutely. Now,
Yeah.
I know that you folks are, all over the world. A lot of times when I go to call you, it's, I've got to be very careful about time zone changes. But, I think you're everywhere except Antarctica, or maybe you have been. I'm not sure. But, what's different in the different regions? Are you finding some industries, some regions have a different level of concern or have a different way of sort of interacting with the methodologies? Or do you see any differences from region to region?
Yes, and I'll start with that, Patty. It's some countries, and even some regions, have an aversion to accountability. That is, they just don't want to see the value of what they do, and that gets in the way of doing this. They're quite happy not being measured and not having to be held accountable as part of the culture. And I probably shouldn't use any countries there, and I don't think I will, but that happens sometimes. And then also data collection can vary with the different countries. Some will give you very false data or very biased data. Some will give very accurate data. Again, it's a cultural issue sometimes. And then in some countries, particularly in the third world countries, they don't have data clearly defined, and it's not easily accessible. And so that makes it more difficult to do this. But for the most part, the model works in any country, any setting, and we're in 70 countries now, and our books are in 38 languages, and so it can be used virtually anywhere. We see some cultures, and I think it's because the smaller countries that seem to be well developed tackle this with more success. And Ireland and Singapore are two examples. They're both island countries, and they're small, around 5 million people. And our implementation there had the support of business, universities, and government. And when you got those combinations, it helps. So they're well educated in those two countries. They have good systems in place, and so it works better there than most, I would say. So there are some differences, but the process is the process, and it just have to make a few adjustments along the way. Patty, would you add to that, maybe?
Well, I think part of the difference is, the process works, and as Jack pointed out, it's culture, and it's the reason why they're doing it. So my work in Nigeria, for example, they've got a real reason to do it. They want to make sure that they are investing in programs that are going to drive change in that country, and they have a long way to go. But there's a sincere interest in doing it, whereas in other countries, and U.S. is likely one for many organizations, is they're doing it because someone is saying you've got to do it, and it's almost a burden to them. So the folks in Nigeria, they've embraced it. They are moving forward, and they see this as something that's really going to change their world. Whereas in some, it's a big burden. It's like, do we really have to take this on?
Well, I would think that makes it really difficult, because if you're in an area of the world where you really want to do this, but the data isn't as readily accessible or isn't as reliable, that's a tough lift, no?
Yeah,
it is. Yes.
Well, what you can do is use this methodology to bring it to the attention of the executives. We can say, look, this program connected to safety but we don't have good safety records, or this program connected to sales, but our sales records are not as clear and precise as we'd like. So in your presentation, you can say, this data may not be credible because of this, and we're told that we've got two different sources here sometimes for a data set, and we don't know which one it is. So it brings some of these issues that need to be corrected to the top executives when you're making your presentation, and say we've got to invest some time in having good key performance indicators in place, very accurate and accessible data to support that. So it is tougher, but you can still use it to your advantage, because if it's not accurate, it's not credible, I'm going to do my study and say, I don't think it's that credible, and here's why, but we need it to be credible. You need it to be credible. Can you imagine not having good, clear sales data? I mean, sales data in the organization is what drives the balance sheet and the income statement. And yet we've had some admit, says, look, we don't really know for sure what our sales are. That's scary, but a program like this can point that out clearly and maybe get some attention that way, because you always come out of these briefings with executives with some action items that you want to take as a result of this, and that might be one of those. Invest a little more in the infrastructure for our data.
Quick, I think the point of credible data is important and getting accurate data is important, but what we see happen is a lot of people hold off until they get it perfect, and it's not going to be. And so the question then is, yes, you want the best data possible, but sometimes you have to look for a proxy for the measure. Sometimes you have to create the measure. So a lot of people hold out for perfection, and that's just delaying an inevitable event that's going to occur. We ultimately have to demonstrate value in terms that resonate with decision makers, but more important, that demonstrate we're doing the job for which we have been hired, and that is drive the business.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the paralysis by analysis comment that Jack made earlier. At some point you do have to hand the book to the manuscript to the publisher, or you have to hand the test
Right.
in. At some point you have to pull the trigger. But I can understand, especially if you're earlier in this process and perhaps less comfortable. But you mentioned before about comfort with the accuracy of the data. I would imagine that in some countries or some scenarios, people know that the data may not be completely accurate, but it's directionally correct, which gets you to a better decision-making level than you would have had other than that.
You can be roughly right or precisely wrong sometimes. So
it's better to be directionally correct than precisely wrong, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yep.
We know it's going in this direction. It's just that some data might be misclassified or labeled, and therefore it may not be as accurate. But if we're using the same system before and after, some comfort in saying that then the change here that we see must be tied to the program in some way. Of course, we sort out the effects of that change back to the program. So
right.
It's like if it's flawed a little bit in the beginning and it's flawed a little bit in the follow-up, the difference there might be pretty accurate data. So yes, we got to keep working with it. And this is more usually for the developed countries or developing countries, and not so much our fully developed countries. But you can have pockets of this in almost any organization, as Patti was saying.
Yep, sure. So, as you look at your clients over the years, I'm sure that you love all of your clients equally. But maybe there were some that just, after all of the companies you've worked with around the world, are there some that just stand out as it was a great example of their ability to think about the business impact of the work that they do, and what they found out in that process helped to make really much more credible business decisions? Are there just some projects that you're aware of that were just outstanding that you could share? And obviously change the names to protect the innocent,
Well, I'll start with that. And Patti can certainly add to that. We both work with a lot of clients. We have about 5,000 organizations using it, so it's a lot of users. And to use it, that means they've had at least one impact study that connected to business impact. But we've had some good stories of consistent use. And I'll go to Scripps Health in San Diego, for example. In our book, Measuring ROI in Healthcare, the co-author there, who was the chief operating officer, was indicating how many certified ROI professionals they had, and this is in the preface of the book, and was actually in chapter 1 of the book, and was indicating that part of Scripps' success, and it's a very successful healthcare firm, was attributed to this methodology. And they were proud at that time of having 29 certified ROI professionals on board. So it varies by industry. And I recall I worked with UPS in Atlanta, the headquarters. They've hosted this certification we have 10 times in a row. What they would do is come into the certification class in the beginning of the week and talk about how they've used ROI to have an impact in various parts of their company. In one case, there was some consideration of perhaps removing or discontinuing the tuition refund plan. It was only rumor, but the team did the ROI analysis on this tuition refund plan and show what was working and what was not working, and what could be changed to make it work better. You see, it was negative as the management team was thinking, but with some changes it could be positive. And when that was presented, they made the adjustments and they kept it. So they actually attributed the ROI study to keeping that plan in place. And we hear stories, particularly in the sales area, how we have driven sales and helped drive market share. So it varies, and it varies. Some industries, this is kind of dominates the industry, like in telecoms. So they're essentially all using this in the States, and most telecoms globally would be using this. The package delivery companies, the three largest, are using it for many years, and that's UPS, FedEx, and DHL. And it goes that way with the oil companies often, but some of the tech companies, a lot of the tech companies are doing it. And again, they report out impacts depending on the study. And some studies are quite involved, where they really are driving some key impact measures. Like I remember in Intel, a huge impact study that had a major effect on the company. It was called a transformation project, and ROI showed its value and what they needed to change to get to that.
It's pretty well known because she's been on the platform describing it. Lou Tedrick of Verizon has done an amazing job implementing it and integrating it, and she's a true champion for demonstrating value that's important to the business. And so we began working with them many years ago, and Lou actually sat through the entire week-long certification, and she did not miss a moment. It was amazing. But another area that we're seeing some good work and interesting projects that are making a difference is in corporate social responsibility, and that's an area in which we have worked for many years. But I've been doing some work with a consulting company in Seattle, Washington. It's a nonprofit. It's called FSG. And their initiative in which I was involved was an innovation lab, and they had companies come in and think about projects that they could implement within their organizations to not only do good for the business, but do well by other people. And so one organization, Tyson Foods, the head of corporate social responsibility at Tyson, Kevin Sheeran, his team, Donna and Emily, their team, they were piloting a program, Upward Academy. And the intent of Upward Academy was to lift up some of the employees in terms of those people who struggled with English as a second language and some other basic skills. But they came into that innovation lab with this program, and they wanted to do the impact and ROI on that program. And so I had the opportunity to work with them on that, and demonstrated positive ROI based on productivity measures and efficiency measures. Kevin actually was recognized at ATD this year at the conference for his work in innovative learning and development. But more than that, for the company, based on the results of this study, they have now started implementing Upward Academy throughout the organization in different regions. So the benefits of demonstrating value like this are great. It's not just the accounting for the resource allocation. It's really about business process improvement and how to do good by the business as well as good by your people.
Yeah, I think that higher connection to, mission and purpose. I now work in a not-for-profit world, and I know how critically important that is, and also how much you need to gather stakeholders, and being able to articulate the impact of what you do is another great reason why this kind of work makes so much sense.
Now, I was just going to build on that. We have a lot of people come to us and say, why do you always talk about ROI? Why just talk about the money? Everything's not about the money. Well, technically it is, because you can't do good unless you do well. And that's where we are. That's what cost-benefit analysis is all about, resource allocation. But you have to know how well you're doing to make those judgments about whether to move the money in one direction or the other. So we can balance the doing well and the doing good at the same time. And we're seeing more and more organizations recognize that and put steps in place to do just that.
And we add to that the fact that some of the impact measures are not converted to money, and we call those intangibles. And they're very important. And that may be reputation, brand, image, teamwork, even engagement sometimes. So these are important concepts. It's just not always or not usually converted to money in an organization. So they're still important. So intangibles are something that we connect to for each study and report it out as well. That's for the people who say it's not always money. True, but the money is going to help make the decision in some people's minds. But yes, there's some non-monetary measures that are just as important, if not more important, and that's the intangibles.
Oh, without question. I mean, we're looking to articulate business impact here, and that, in a broader sense, is exactly what you're talking about. There are different ways to articulate the impact, and the methodology kind of gets you to that. So I have a question. So Jack, when you developed this in the 70s, and then you both started bringing this even to a more global audience in the 80s, the 90s, and now you have ROI institutes all over the world. I mean, when you think about sort of the evolution of the thinking around ROI and analytics, what do you think are the key things that are different now, and where do you think we're headed?
If you go back in the 70s and 80s, not much pressure on HR to show its value, learning and development as well. So many functions that are in the soft area, I should say, or non-capital area, didn't have to show the value. So there was less motivation to do it. But in today's world, with a competitive global economy, we have everybody's trying to be efficient and effective and fit in and make their organization survive and thrive. To do so, you have to be so efficient. As one CFO says, look, we can't afford to have programs in place that don't work. So there's so many forces that are saying, even before you implement a project or program these days, we want to see the financial ROI, maybe, or those big programs are required. So a lot of the growth has been driven by the client, the donor, the sponsor, the funder, the people who have given money for a particular program. So I think that's changed. It didn't used to be there, but it is. And the area where it shows so much is the Middle East. Anytime we work in a country where there's tremendous change, uncertainty, turmoil, maybe oil prices are down, there's conflict, there's all kinds of things going on. That drives the need for this accountability because you've got less budget to work with now, and so you got to make sure that's allocated properly. And you want to allocate to those parts of the organizations that are driving value that you can see and understand. And that leads us to the ROI. So our work in the Middle East is the most comprehensive that we've seen it. I had 7 trips last year to the Middle East, and we'll have that many this year, and Patty has about the same. And so we're just helping so many organizations, and they're doing such great work there, and so it's amazing. So that's changed the requirement for it. Also, because more people are doing it, we've reached the tipping point in a lot of countries where, hey, it's a standard. You got to do it. And you've got some organizations like Training Magazine suggest that you need this methodology in place if you want to be considered for their top 125 training organizations. So you've got a lot of the profession stepping up saying, we need this. And ATD endorsed this methodology in the year 2000, and they did it because this is the process that's going to help our members show the value of what they do. So when you get all of this support that we didn't have in the early stages, it makes a tremendous difference. Now, we add to that, we've got streamlined processes. We've got technology that can support it. We've got great ways of communicating data that we didn't have maybe in those early days. So that makes it easier to do this and easier to present it and deal with it. So it has evolved and changed. And I'd say one more thing. We're realizing that you can't measure your way to success, but you can design your way to success. So what we have to get people to think about, organizations to think about, and functions to think about is, let's design your programs and projects to deliver the impact that you need. So connect it to the impact in the beginning, make sure you got the right solution, and expect success throughout the process. That minimizes the biggest barrier we have, the fear of the ROI being negative. It almost goes away when you design for it, and that's a change that we've seen in the last probably 6 or 7 years. So it's changed, and it's amazing, but it's still not where Patty and I would like to see it. There's still far too many programs that are not working, and places where this could make a difference in the entire organization.
Absolutely.
Sorry it took so long on that.
No, I hear you clearly. I mean, the profession is asking for this on behalf of its members because I think people who are in the profession are being asked because business leaders expect this. I've heard you speak often about the need to be able to articulate your reasonable business judgment as to the value of something, and that has to come from something. That has to come from some analysis that you've done using a methodology that is very similar to a lot of the work done in economic circles. So it makes perfect sense, I think, to get people to understand that this is or should be part and parcel of your professional responsibilities, right?
Yes. And when you embrace this, it just makes things so much better and easier. Last night I had a conversation with Jessica Kriegel. She wrote the book Unfairly Labeled. She's with Oracle. And she was telling us about how this made such a difference in her thinking when she went through the certification about 5 years ago and on the West Coast. She says, I don't look at things the same way anymore. I think about the business connection to whatever we're doing. If you're in an organization, you really need to be doing that. And so it does have that kind of effect on you when you see it logically and rationally, but you see a system that works, and it's user-friendly, and it's CEO and CFO friendly at the same time.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. We have a question that's come in, and many of the questions are sort of we've touched on, but here's one that says, what's next for the two of you in terms of where you think your passions and energy are going to take you? What's on the horizon for you and the ROI team?
Wow, it's just so much. There's so much of the same, but some of the fun things that we're involved in. I think our nonprofit and our humanitarian work is growing. I think there's more and more interest in really connecting the doing good and doing well. So we see more of that. We're working with religious organizations because, as everyone knows, there's a decline in interest in membership in churches regardless of the religion, and so they're really trying to demonstrate their relevance in this world in which we live. So a lot of good work going there, and we see more of that coming down the pike. We're doing more with Native Americans. We've got a big project going on now in North Dakota. One of our former students or workshop participants from many years ago, she actually adapted our framework for the tribal community. And she did that through a qualitative method, through talking circles, and really getting the leadership of the tribes involved and engaged. And so she has finally been funded after all these years to implement it. So we're seeing more work from that perspective. You know, what is the value of the tribal college to the tribal community? So I think those types of projects are our future, but demonstrating the value of these new platforms that are out there. Jack mentioned technology is a game changer for us. This whole conversation around analytics has made measurement and ROI sexy, right? And while people talk analytics like it's something new, what they're really asking for is, help me demonstrate the impact and ROI of what we're doing, or assess the need for what we're doing and give me the business case. So it's the same conversation, it's just a different language, but what really makes it different is that technology. And so we have cool technologies like Qualtrics, who can do all things in one platform, or Workday, who is really doing some cool work with their analytics modules and some other things they have going on. But then too, all the learning platforms out there, platforms like, Degreed and Coursera and all these out there, people, while they're shiny objects today, people are going to want to demonstrate or at least see value beyond the activity of those platforms. We saw it years ago with other platforms, and we're seeing an uptick in that. We've actually, in the last week, had three conversations as of this morning from either providers or clients who want to demonstrate that. So I think the technology platforms is a big area that we're going to move forward with, more so than in the past, because there's so much technology. Our nonprofit work, our humanitarian work, and our faith-based work is going to grow in addition to the industry work that we do. Jack?
I think just to summarize, we see new applications, as we described there. When we started with our first study in the 70s, and we started the ROI Institute 25 years ago, we worked with businesses. But these days, most of our work is with governments, NGOs, charitable, nonprofits, universities, healthcare. So it's changed. And then with new industries, we write books around a particular industry, like the healthcare, for example. And then we got a new book coming out on measuring the ROI in governments to tackle the entire industry. And then we look at functions, new functions. And we certainly tackled HR and learning, but also we've tackled quality, technology, and marketing. But now we tackled innovation, and with a new book on innovation, and a lot of work in that area. So new functions in an organization. And finally, cultures. That usually gets us into new countries. And so we've got many new countries that we want to continue to work in to bring it to more people who need this, but just can't afford it, don't have resources. And so we're working at ways to get to them. And so that's, to us, is very exciting as well.
And then also, Rebecca, lifelong learning. Lifelong learning has been a topic of conversation for decades. Decades and decades. And what does it mean to the community, to the individual, and to the organization? Well, there's been a resurrection of interest there. And that's where looking at platforms and cultures, organization cultures, come into play. We're doing some work in partnership with ATD, Courtney Vidal, who's head of education at ATD, on demonstrating the impact and ROI of lifelong learning. And it's really targeting what can the CLO do to help drive that, to drive it within the organization so that there is a payoff for these things. So, by the way, that book will be out next spring, just saying. So we have a lot of fun things going on.
Well, that's terrific. I think I think there's a distinct shift in the way we do this. And, your comments before about technology, maybe that helps us with access to data, which is, a perennial challenge sometimes for folks. But I'm hopeful that it's a brighter future going forward. So, well, I tell you, 40 minutes has just zipped by. I think we could probably talk for a lot longer, but let me just end by asking both of you, what didn't I ask that you thought surely I would, or what kind of closing thoughts or would you like to share with the crew today?
Well, I'll start with that one. I think you covered it quite well with your questions and questions from the audience. However, it's sometimes helpful to just think through the barriers to making this work. We touched on them. The number one barrier is the fear of ROI, and I think we tackle that best by trying to get people to be proactive and get them to design for the results to begin with. Then there's the concern about it's too complex, it's too difficult, so we have to break it down and keep showing people that it's not so difficult. And then there's a barrier of saying this is extra effort for someone to do, a lot of extra effort. But we suggest you share the joy by designing for the results that you want. Share the joy for the designers, developers, and administrators, everyone else involved in the program. So it doesn't become such a burden for just one or two groups or a small number of people. And finally, the barrier, I don't know how to do this. It doesn't come with a lot of preparation for jobs. But that's changing too. We're trying to get this into a lot of universities. There's about 70 universities have our certification as a graduate course in the USA, either at the master's or PhD level. That number is growing. And that same kind of penetration is going on in other countries as well, trying to get people prepared to do this. So those are barriers that we're working on.
And it is a real fear for a lot of people who are not, numbers people. But that, the numbers is where we're going, right? Measurement is where we are. Now, what we don't want to get lost in conversation is the importance of the qualitative. So when we're working, we're going for numbers and ROI and impact, but we also take the deep dive and we use qualitative methodologies to really understand what is happening. And Rebecca, I go back to a conversation with Michael Arena, a GM, when you and I were working on a project there for the conference board. They're all quants, right? These are math people. But he also talked about the importance of ethnography and qualitative approaches. He said, the numbers are showing you this, but sometimes you have to go look at things. You have to go see what's happening. So I think, people are a little fearful because there is numbers, but there's also the qualitative side, which is so rich. But then also it's something we just need to embrace and learn how to love. And there's so many ways to build capability to do it. I mean, I was talking about some of the platforms now that offer up very simple learning solutions just to get your head around, what is measurement and how can it work for me? Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. It's here. If I can do it, anyone else can do it. Put it that way. I mean, we can do this. And so just don't let fear and fear of the unknown. I think education on what measurement is and what impact and ROI is important too.
We need numbers and we need narrative. We had a comment just recently from someone says, I've been presenting our results from our soft skills programs with just stories, and the stories bring it to life. But now I've been asked, could I spice it up with some numbers, some actual data? And so I think that's typical. We love stories. Stories help us understand and learn and retain. But it's the numbers that's convincing to people that we really made a difference. So we really need narrative and numbers, both.
Well, hopefully your new book on the ROI of soft skills will be out in a hurry, and it'll help them. So there you go. So let me close by saying a huge thank you. Thank you for taking some time today to share your thoughts, but thank you for the incredible contribution you've made to our profession. And I know many of us are deeply personally grateful for the support and the insights over the years. So thank you both very, very much for joining us today for this podcast.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. We appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks.
You bet. And I want to thank everyone who had an opportunity to dial in and join us live. And if you're enjoying this podcast, I hope you'll tune in for future sessions for a conversation with. And today, it's been my absolute pleasure to be delivering this installment of A Conversation with Drs. Jack and Patti Phillips. Thank you both. Thank you all for joining. And again, thanks for all the work that you do. Take care now. Bye-bye.
This has been A Conversation with, brought to you by the Conference Board's Human Capital Center.